I caught my cheating wife with her, and that was just the beginning. My now ex-wife and I are both 26 years old. We have a 5-year-old son and a 10-month-old daughter together. I work as a manager at an IT company, while she works as a receptionist at a hospital. However, due to her recent pregnancy and maternity leave, she hasn't been working much lately. Our life together seemed stable, or so I thought. We had different personalities. I'm outgoing and enjoy socializing, while she's more introverted, preferring to spend time with close family and a small circle of friends. Despite our differences, I believed we complemented each other. On Saturday, July 1st, 2023, an event unfolded that shattered my perception of our marriage. It started innocuously enough. An ex-employee of mine, a 23-year-old man, showed up at our house. He thought I'd be home since I typically don't work on Saturdays. He had come to deliver some documents I'd accidentally left at his place the day before during a work-related discussion. At the time, I was visiting my parents, who live about 5 miles away. My wife was home with our children. When the doorbell rang, my wife answered. She didn't recognize him, so he explained that he used to work for me and was there to drop off the documents. According to what I learned later, she invited him inside and offered him coffee while he waited for me. What happened next was something I could never have imagined. 2 days later, I received a phone call from this ex-employee. His voice was hesitant and filled with guilt. He asked, "Do you know about me and your wife?" His question caught me off guard. I asked him to explain, thinking this was some sort of misunderstanding. He went on to recount what had happened that Saturday in a way that left me stunned and furious. He said, "After your wife invited me in, we started talking. We quickly bonded over literature. She mentioned some books she loved, and I shared my favorites. She was very friendly, and well, things escalated. We kissed. Then your son walked into the living room and saw us. She told him not to worry and sent him to watch TV. After that, we went upstairs, and well, I was in disbelief. I cut him off, saying, 'Are you joking? If this is some kind of sick prank, it isn't funny,' but he insisted it was the truth. 'I'm sorry,' he said. 'I just thought you should know. Your little boy saw his mother with someone else, and I didn't want you to think I was hiding it if you ever found out. But remember, your wife is the one who's married. I didn't force her into anything.' I was speechless. The more he spoke, the angrier I became. He continued, 'That's why I resigned on July 7th. I didn't know if you'd find out, and I couldn't keep working for you knowing what had happened. I'm sorry, and I won't bother you again.' After the call ended, I sat in silence, trying to process what I had just heard. This man had only started working for me in May, and I was certain my wife had never even known of his existence until that day. How could something like this happen? My emotions swung wildly between disbelief, anger, and heartbreak. I confronted my wife that evening. When I told her what I had learned, she initially denied everything. She claimed the ex-employee was lying to create drama. But when I mentioned that our son had seen them together, her demeanor changed. She broke down crying and admitted to what had happened. She kept saying she didn't know what had come over her and that it was a terrible mistake. As I stood there listening to her sobbing, my mind raced. Was this a one-time thing, or had there been others? Could I ever trust her again? And what about our children? Our son had seen his mother's betrayal. How would that affect him? I had so many questions, but at that moment, I couldn't bring myself to ask any of them. Instead, I walked out of the house. I needed air, Space, clarity. I drove aimlessly for hours, my thoughts a chaotic jumble. Memories of our life together, our wedding day, the births of our children, quiet evenings at home flashed through my mind. How had it all come to this? When I finally returned home, it was late. My wife was still awake, sitting on the couch with red, swollen eyes. She looked at me, her face a mixture of guilt and desperation. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I love you. I'll do anything to fix this." But I couldn't respond. The words felt hollow. Love? If she loved me, how could she do this? I slept in the guest room that night, though slept might be an exaggeration. My mind was too restless to allow for rest. The next day, I called my best friend and told him everything. He listened patiently, offering support and advice. "You need to think about what's best for you and the kids," he said. "This isn't just about your marriage anymore. It's about their well-being too." He was right. As much as I wanted to rage and lash out, I had to consider my children. Our son had already been exposed to something no child should ever witness. I couldn't let this situation spiral any further out of control. Over the following days, my wife and I had several long, painful conversations. She insisted that it was a moment of weakness, a lapse in judgment. She begged for forgiveness, promising to go to therapy and do whatever it took to rebuild my trust. But I wasn't sure if forgiveness was even possible. The image of her betrayal was burned into my mind, a constant reminder of what had been lost. I also spoke with a lawyer to understand my options. I wanted to ensure that my children's lives would be as stable as possible, regardless of what happened between their mother and me. The lawyer was compassionate but practical, laying out the potential scenarios and advising me to document everything related to the incident. As the days turned into weeks, I found myself growing more distant from my wife. Every interaction felt strained, every word weighed down by the unspoken tension between us. I could see the toll it was taking on her, but I couldn't bring myself to care. My priority was my children, and I threw myself into being there for them. I took our son to the park, played with our daughter, and tried to create a sense of normalcy amid the chaos. Eventually, I made the difficult decision to file for divorce. It wasn't an easy choice, but I knew it was the right one. The trust between us had been shattered, and I couldn't see a way to rebuild it. I told my wife, and though she cried and pleaded, she didn't fight me on it. I think deep down, she knew our marriage was beyond saving. The divorce process was emotionally draining. We agreed on joint custody of the children, but the logistics of co-parenting added another layer of complexity to an already painful situation. There were moments when I questioned my decision, wondering if I should have tried harder to forgive her for the sake of our family. But each time those doubts crept in, I reminded myself of the betrayal, of the hurt in my son's eyes when he asked me why mommy made a new friend kiss her. Now, months later, I'm still picking up the pieces. There are days when the pain feels overwhelming, when I miss the life we once had. But there are also moments of hope, glimmers of a future where I can find happiness again. I've started therapy, and it's helping me work through my emotions and find a sense of closure. As for my ex-wife, she's trying to rebuild her own life. She's still in therapy and has expressed a desire to be the best mother she can for our children. While I may never fully forgive her, I've come to accept that she'll always be a part of my life because of our kids. My focus now is on being the best father I can be, providing them with the love and stability they deserve. This experience has taught me many things about trust, resilience, and the importance of prioritizing one's own well-being. It's a journey I never wanted to take, but it's one that has made me stronger. And for that, I'm grateful. I stood there in the living room, staring at her, still trying to process what had just happened. I had walked in expecting to find my wife, but instead, I was met with the shattered remnants of everything I thought we had built together. She was sobbing, her face streaked with tears, but it didn't make me feel any better. My heart was breaking, but it was hard to feel sympathy for someone who had so casually destroyed the life we had. "Do you realize what you've done?" I asked, my voice shaky but firm. "Not just to me, but to our children? Our son saw you. How do you explain that to him?" Her response came in the form of a quiet sob. She shook her head, as if she couldn't even grasp the gravity of what she had done. I didn't think he'd understand. "He's too young to remember," she stammered, her voice filled with regret. But the damage was already done. The pain in my chest was unbearable, and her words didn't help. The thought of our son witnessing the destruction of our family, his family, was something I couldn't shake. It was a burden I couldn't carry alone, and I couldn't let her dismiss it so easily. I looked away, not able to bear the sight of her anymore. "I need time," I said, my voice flat and cold. "I'm going to my parents' house for a few days." I walked out without another word, feeling like a stranger in my own home. Every step away from her felt like an act of self-preservation, as though leaving was the only thing that could keep me from losing my mind. But even as I left, my thoughts were already swirling in a storm of confusion and anger. The days that followed were the hardest of my life. I stayed with my parents, trying to wrap my head around what had happened. My parents were supportive, of course, hugging me, assuring me that I wasn't alone in this. But their words felt empty, as though they were speaking to me from a distance, not truly understanding the depth of my pain. Her family, too, was horrified by her actions. I had never imagined they would side with me, but they did. They didn't try to justify her betrayal. They apologized on her behalf, offering whatever help they could. It should have been comforting, but instead, it felt like an insult to the relationship we had once shared. Their sympathy only reminded me of what had been lost. In those first few days, the grief consumed me. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. My mind was a maze of questions, each one more painful than the last. Why did she do this? Was I not enough for her? Had I failed somehow? What did this mean for our future? I tried to remember the good times, the moments we had laughed together, shared hopes for the future, built a life for our children. But it was hard to reconcile those memories with the reality of what she had done. There were no clear signs of trouble, no red flags that warned me of what was coming. We had our disagreements, sure, like any couple, but they had never seemed so dangerous. Infidelity was the last thing I ever thought I would have to face. I thought we were happy, or at least, I had convinced myself we were. But clearly, I had been wrong. The thought that hurt the most was the one about our son. He was too young to understand what had happened, but he wasn't blind. Children notice things. They see when their parents are no longer happy, when the love between them fades. I couldn't shake the image of him watching his mother make choices that would tear his world apart. How would I explain this to him when he was older? How would I help him make sense of the pain that would linger long after the dust had settled? And then there was our baby daughter, blissfully unaware of the storm that had just wrecked her family. She didn't know the chaos we were about to endure. She deserved so much better. And yet here we were, at the edge of a precipice, unsure of where to go from here. After days of reflection, of sitting in silence and letting the weight of it all wash over me, I made a decision. It wasn't one I came to lightly, but it was clear that our marriage had been irreparably damaged. The trust was gone, and with it, the foundation of everything we had worked for. I couldn't forgive her. Not now, not ever. "I've made up my mind," I told her when I finally faced her again. She had been begging me for a chance to fix things, pleading with me to reconsider. But I knew there was no going back. "You made a choice," I said, my voice steady, but my heart was shattering inside. "You chose to destroy our family. There's no coming back from that." The divorce was inevitable. We had to figure out the logistics next. Custody of the children, division of assets, it all felt like an overwhelming mountain to climb. But more than that, I was terrified. I had seen so many men in situations like this lose everything, end up with visitation rights that barely allowed them to see their children, and homes they had worked so hard for torn away from them. That wasn't going to be me. Living in England, I knew the legal system often favored mothers in custody battles. But I also knew I had a strong case. The fact that our son had witnessed her infidelity would play in my favor. I started researching family law, trying to understand my rights and options. It wasn't enough to just feel angry, I needed to take action. I reached out to a solicitor, someone who specialized in divorce and custody cases. They were blunt but helpful. "Document everything," they said. "Every conversation, every piece of evidence, every admission of guilt." I made sure to write down the details of our discussions, the phone call from her ex-employee, and everything she had confessed to me. Meanwhile, I also took stock of our financial situation. I knew this wasn't going to be a quick or cheap process. I couldn't afford to let the divorce drain me financially, so I made sure I had access to enough funds to cover my legal fees and living expenses. The weeks dragged on, but I threw myself into work. Not just because it helped me keep my mind off things, but because it was the only way I could provide some semblance of stability for my kids. I spent every possible moment with them, cherishing the time I had. My parents were a great help, stepping in when I needed to focus on the legal side of things. As for my ex-wife, she didn't give up. She continued to reach out, asking if there was any chance we could work things out. She expressed regret, sorrow, and guilt. But I couldn't bring myself to listen anymore. My heart was too broken, and the scars she had left were too deep. "I'm sorry," I told her as kindly as I could. "But I can't forgive what you've done." Looking back now, I can see that, painful as it was, this experience has taught me something important. It's shown me the value of resilience, the strength that comes from standing up for myself and my children. I've learned that it's okay to walk away from a relationship that's no longer healthy, even if it's difficult. More than anything, I've learned that my children's well-being comes first. I will do everything in my power to give them the stability, love, and security they deserve. I don't know what the future holds, but I'm determined to rebuild my life this time with a foundation of self-respect and a commitment to the people who matter most. My children are my priority, and no matter how hard the road ahead may be, I will walk it for them.